Hey, howdy, kids, and welcome. It is time for this week's episode of Conscious Embodiment, Astrology, and Dreams with Dr. Michael Lennox. It's good to be here. Howdy, Zoe. How you doing this week?
Hey, Michael, I'm good. I just got my stitches out.
Oh, that's right. You had a little Uranian finger. How'd it go? How'd the healing go?
Well, so I'm perfectly on track. It looks gross, but we're doing well. Yeah, thank God.
We're doing well. That's great. Well, we're coming at you for the week of June 26th through July 2nd. So we're at the turn of the month. Got a bit of stuff to talk about today, but as ever, I love to start with a question. Laura writes, "Hello, Michael. I have a question that has piqued my interest from your Venus story below." I guess she was responding to a Venus retrograde marketing email. How do you feel about our progressed charts and how do things play out with it? I'm sure that's a loaded question for you. Yes. This is a very loaded question. But in the near future, could you speak to that on your podcast? Does the progressed chart have any validity and to what extent? Love listening to your podcast. Namaste, Laura. Well, thank you, Laura. I'm glad you love listening to my podcast. And I love the progressed chart. And so let me see if I can't present a kind of general overview about what it is and how we tend to use it in astrology.
Great.
So the progressed chart is not a chart that ever reflects someplace that planets go. Whereas the natal chart reflects exactly where the planets were when you took your first breath. So the progressed chart doesn't follow planets. It follows your progression through life and using the natal chart as a sort of starting point to answer the question, what would it mean if we looked at this chart and advanced it, progressed it in such a way that might reflect someone's growth and evolution through their life based on who they are because of the natal chart that reflects them? So we live in a world that is yearly. Because the Earth's orbit around the sun happens in these yearly increments and we have birthdays and anniversaries, everything about our consciousness is solar in Western astrology. We follow the sun. And since we have this yearly cyclical timing thing about life, the algorithm that is applied to the natal chart that is the progress chart moves the sun sign point 1 degree for every year that you're alive. So I was born with the sun at 29 degrees of Leo. That means when I was 1 year old, my progress chart would have reflected a sign change of the sun moving into 0 Virgo. Then when I was 6 years old, my progress chart would have reflected 5 years Virgo. You see, every year you're alive, the progress sun moves 1 degree.
Okay.
And then every other planet or point in the chart moves at a speed that's based on its orbital speed compared to the Earth's orbital speed, if the Earth's orbital speed is being expressed as 1 degree per year. So when you look at a progressed chart, Pluto, Neptune, Uranus, those outer planets, they're barely going to move by progression from beginning to the end of life. Social planets, Saturn and Jupiter, will move a handful of degrees between birth and death. Personal planets, a handful more. The sun, 1 degree every year, and the moon zips around at a speed of changing signs roughly every 2 years. So it's a chart that can be read just like you would read a natal chart, but again, it doesn't reflect where planets are. It reflects where you, the individual, have grown to and evolved to and progressed to through your life. Now, you don't just look at the progressed chart and interpret it like this is who I am. That would be confusing and wouldn't take into account the power of the natal chart. Your natal chart is who you are from beginning of life to end of life, first breath to last. But what you can do with this progressed chart is note when the movement of a progressed planet point or the moon hits a natal chart point or planet, then the issue that's reflecting will pop, right? So if your progressed moon is hitting your natal Venus, that's going to rise up an evolution of capacity to understand love at a deeper level.
And can I ask you, like, is that the same as when you say there's a transit in your chart?
Correct. That is not the same, not at all.
Okay.
A transit on your natal chart is the current movement of a planet making geometrical contact with points that are significant because of your birth chart.
Right.
That's a transit. Current energy impacts you in a certain way based on the geometry to your natal chart.
Okay.
The progressed chart in this regard, where a progressed planet hits a natal chart point, might spark a really powerful conversation between an astrologer and a client about an issue that's popping in their life that is being met by a level of their evolution to handle it. Rich conversations can result.
This is
but those
much
are rare
deeper.
moments through
It's like
life. Pardon?
much deeper nuanced conversation.
Yes, it's
Okay,
a
got
deeper nuance to say this issue is coming up now because you are at a place in your development to handle it in a new and deeper way.
Got it.
But in terms of being an astrologer day to day and seeing people, it is rare to be sitting with somebody when a progressed planet is touching a natal chart point. It happens, it's infrequent, and when we see it, we talk about it. Another valuable use of the progressed chart is the progressed sun and the progressed moon coming together in exactly the way the sun and moon do in a lunar cycle. You have a new moon in the lunar cycle. That's when we set intentions and start things up again. Well, there's a progressed new moon. Happens about 2 times in a life, maybe 3 if you live long enough, and the first one happens early along, where the progressed sun hits a point and the progressed moon catches up with it. And those are big alpha omega moments in a life. Like I had a progressed new moon in 2018 in my progressed 10th house of work and career. And that was the year I started expanding my business. That's when I hired the marketing team, changed my website. So it was a really big moment for me in my career, and my progressed chart reflected it with this progressed new moon. And 6 years later or so, you have a progressed first quarter moon where there's some reckoning and movement to whatever gets established in the progressed new moon. 12 years after that, there's a progressed full moon where there's a culmination point that can describe the longer arc of a life over, say, 25 years as opposed to a 28-day lunar cycle. So if I'm sitting with somebody in a session and their progressed lunar cycle is reaching one of those pivotal moments, we'll talk about that too. So I'm hoping this is enough of an explanation to give people who've never heard of this a kind of basic sense of what the progressed chart is and when we use it, understanding that it's infrequent, that the timing of a session and the timing of a progressed event is happening at the same time. But when it does, you can bet your ass that we're paying attention to it, that it is valid, that it is significant. But it is a very different use of astrological information than working with transits. There's a little big news this week with Mercury. First and foremost, Mercury is moving out of Gemini and into Cancer tonight, 6 p.m. or so Pacific time. The communication planet leaves the sign of one of his ruling mansions of Gemini and into the much more inhibited, careful, introverted sign of Cancer. So for one thing, that means that our mental body is aligned with a different archetype, a cardinal water sign. So on the one hand, cardinal means we start things up in a cardinal energy. We create initiations of movement. But Cancer is still a water sign. It's still about inhibition and sort of pulling close into the vest. And so on the one hand, the cardinal quality of Mercury in Cancer means we might be ready to speak up into certain conversations about intimacy, self-care, what's really tender in your, emotional experience. But we're also going to be generally inhibited to communicate in a overtly extroverted way because Cancer is a sign that tends to generate a little bit of closeness to the vest and holding back, especially when sensitivity or vulnerability is in the mix. So communication gets a big shift in style between today and tomorrow. Now, because the Sun and Mercury are never very far away from each other because of our proximity, right? It's the closest planet to the Sun, so it's much closer than we are, and he's zipping around the Sun in a very fast orbit. And so from our perspective, we never see the Sun very far away from Mercury. And so the Sun moved into Cancer last week, and tonight Mercury follows suit. And on Friday, the planet of mind and thought and communication catches up with the Sun that represents our conscious awareness. Now, it's easy to mistake that conscious awareness and our thinking is the same thing because they're not. Thinking from a mercurial perspective really is that inner narrator, that sort of thoughtful monologue that guides us through life, through which we understand like who we are and where we are and when we are. It's the inner monologue, it's the impulse to speak, and it's how we perceive our world and our life. The Sun is not really about our perception of it. It's about our inhabiting our conscious awareness. So in fact, one of the ways our conscious awareness that is archetypally represented by the Sun catches up with everything we've been thinking and perceiving is when the two of them conjunct, come together at the same place in the sky. Mm-hmm. And this happens in every Mercury retrograde cycle, and we call that the inferior conjunction. And it happens like now, where we're in 2 months of what I call the free and clear period, where Mercury is moving without any retrograde cycle in sight. Mm-hmm. We call that the superior conjunction. There's actually an interesting distinction there because the superior conjunction has the Sun on the other side, Mercury on the other side of the Sun, and the inferior conjunction, when Mercury is appearing to move backwards, Mercury is in front of the Sun, more inwardly directed, closer to our psyche, because he's moving backwards. Either way, we get a download of guidance and wisdom and information and data about the journey when the planet of communication connects with the Sun that represents our conscious awareness. Okay. So that does mean that Friday in particular, but a couple of days on either side of Friday. So as you move through the weekend ahead, it's a great time to just be paying attention to all the signs and messages and guidance that's out there. Now, when Mercury is backwards, it's almost more important to do this consciously because we're already in a befuddling mental process when he's moving backwards. We gotta get quiet to hear the messages. Well, Mercury's not retrograde, so we don't have to be as sort of surreptitious about looking for the guidance. It'll be more overt. But make no mistake about it, there's something that happens to both our conscious awareness and our perception when the bodies that represent both of those ideas come together by conjunction, and that happens on Friday. So pay attention to the conversations and the thoughts you're having, the things you're sort of moved to talk about, And because Mercury is always a trickster archetype, look for the happy accidents and the synchronicities and the coincidences, because there might be some interesting guidance buried within a synchronistic experience as we move through the weekend up ahead. Venus retrograde cycle kicks up. In fact, if you haven't gotten the recording from my Venus retrograde class, guys, go to michaellennox.com and get it. We did it yesterday. It was so much fun. And this is the week I kind of purposely planned on doing the Venus retrograde masterclass a week after the shadow started, but before the juicy transits begin that are important to pay attention to for the cycle up ahead. And that begins this week.
The juicy things begin.
Yes, they do. The juicy things begin with, and this is really the for my money, the most important of the triple transits in this cycle is a trine between Venus and Chiron. Trines or triangles, 120-degree geometry, means both planets operate in complete flow and harmony, like the hot water and the cold water being turned on full blast, and you get this yummy flow of warm water. That's the nature of two planets interacting in this harmonious geometry of 120 degrees. And so, therefore, healing is very present in this Venus retrograde cycle. It's the first of the 4 major triple transits. So that counts because we're going through a journey. We're being taken through a process, and it starts with something that happens towards the end of this week, peaking Thursday, where we're going to be more open to, aware of, and able to marinate in the heart stuff that's in a healing process. And because the geometry is flowing and easy, then our access to the wounded spaces in order to cultivate some healing will also be easier. Like if Chiron and Venus were squaring during this cycle, I'd be like, oh God, guys, this is gonna hurt. Now, it doesn't mean that it's not gonna hurt, because Venus is our emotional body planet and Chiron is the wounded healer, but the triangle implies a level of ease and grace. And that can only make it gentler, I guess, I hope. Mm-hmm. To allow the heart's wounded spaces to be valuable for us to marinate in. That's my hope. And no matter what happens, as we move through this week and we get to and through Thursday, we're all going to have some data and information about what this transit's going to bring each of us in the realm of healing. Then on Sunday, just 3 days later, Venus is going to square Uranus. Now we've got a square. Now we've got conflict between the planet of love and the great awakener. That's what Uranus wants always. Uranus's motivation is always to push us up to a higher level of awareness and therefore functioning.
This makes me nervous for some reason based on with my
it should. Well, first of all,
Uranus, encounters. I'm like, what does this square mean?
That's right. What it means is kind of like what you experienced in the portion of your Uranus big cycles. That's the square, right? I think it's. Well, I don't remember what your chart is expressing, but any of us can go back to last week's podcast.
Yeah, I can't remember.
There's a square in there. So yes, your nervousness, Zoe, is appropriate for our listeners to identify with you because, this is where I can then also guarantee that many of us are going to be knocked on our ass by virtue of stuff that happens during this retrograde cycle. And Thursday to Sunday, in planetary movement, 4 days, they ain't nothing.
Right.
So that they come concomitant with each other. And so one could say the weekend itself, starting in Wednesday-ish, peaking Thursday through Sunday, and certainly with us fully till Monday, like that chunk of time, not only will be healing and opening us up to some of the wounded consciousness in I was going to say gentler, but I'm going to say easier fashion, is also subject to knocking us on our ass, but also delivering an awareness of some kind.
Okay.
Even if in this precursor, it's just an awareness of how deep the wound goes.
Mm-hmm.
That might be part of what happens as we move to the end of this week and into next week, that many of us will become aware of issues of intimacy and relationship to finances that need some healing, Trine Chiron, and will knock you on your ass, square Uranus. And though there could be some big bumps in the emotional road as a result of these transits, it's just the precursor to the valuable process that happens next month, late in the month, when Venus turns around. And in August, we'll be revisiting the shit that happens this week.
Okay.
So pay attention to matters of the heart, both intimacy related as well as finances, because Venus rules your finances. Check out my recording if you haven't gotten it. Just head on over to michaelhendricks.com and purchase it. And understand that the work to make that Venus retrograde cycle the most juicy and valuable it can be starts this week, towards the end of the week, with these transits that start up on Thursday. All right, kids, that's kind of it. We're going to have a slightly shorter astrology section this week because there's just not a lot to talk about, although I would say what there's been to talk about is, important and juicy. It's certainly a significant week up ahead, both for the mind and for the heart. And I want to just mention that we have a full moon right at the end of this week that's really hitting with next week's podcast, but understand that it's happening on Monday, and so we will talk about it in next week's podcast. And we will be in July as of the end of this week. And July is an important, huge month on the planet, mostly because the nodes of the moon are changing sign. That's a big shift for all of us on the planet with regard to destiny and fate and what the next year and a half is going to bring in terms of transformative experiences.
It's both the south and the north?
Yeah, both of them are changing signs because
Okay.
they're exact oppositions. So they're both moving. North node's moving out of Taurus and into Aries because they move backwards. South node out of Scorpio and into Libra because they move backwards. And that's a radical shift in terms of eclipse placement, where Dharma and life purpose is guiding the collective. And most importantly for the month of July, and really these bunch of years, is there's a really significant T-square forming between the nodes changing signs and Pluto having just changed signs and dropping back into Capricorn. If any of that seemed a little bit too dense for y'all, come to my global healing meditation next Thursday, the first Thursday of the month, which is I think the 6th. And I'm going to talk all about it in July's global healing meditation because July's really, really significant. This week, it's all about the mind getting some downloads towards the end of the week and the heart opening up to process in a manner that's going to be instructive about later in the summer. So be paying attention to everything, mind and heart, especially towards the end of this week, kids, and have at it.
Did you know that Michael has a daily astro alert? If you enjoy hearing the weekly astrology, you might like knowing more about each day. When you subscribe for the daily astro alerts, you'll get an in-depth explanation of the day's astrology sent right to your email. Subscriptions are only $10 a month, or you can purchase the yearly subscription at the reduced price of $100. To subscribe, head over to michaellennox.com. All right, it's dream segment time. Every week, Dr. Michael will interpret dreams that are sent in via email or take a live caller. If you would like your dream interpreted on the podcast, you can go ahead and email us at dreams@michaellennox.com. Hopefully your dream will make it onto the show. So this week I was talking to my brother about dreams, and I was like, well, do you ever have dreams to interpret? And he's like, well, I don't know, not really. Like yesterday I stayed up late playing video games, and then I dreamed about video games. Does that mean something?
Well, yes.
So yeah, he was
Oh.
gonna call in, but got wrapped up with
Okay.
work. And so this question is like, and I think this happens to a lot of people. Like I've been watching TV, go to sleep, and
You're
then that
gobsmacking
happens.
me.
But does it just mean like it just means you did that activity right before bed, or does it mean what? Does it mean
Something
anything?
deeper,
Yeah.
right? So, you're blowing me away because I'm literally this morning, on the day that we are recording this podcast, I'm responding to someone who's in my diving into the shadow class, who basically asked the same thing.
Yeah.
Like she was saying, all right, I'm dreaming of the things that I did during the day, and here's what was different but with a slightly different outcome. What's that about? And so I had to answer her in two parts because I had to address the two phenomenon, because with her case, which I'm about to answer for your brother's sake, yes, you're dreaming of what you did that day because of what you did that day. But with her reframing the outcome, that's content. That's her psyche working out, I can change my perceptions. I can alter how I do this thing called life. And the dream is reflecting that. But the fact that she's dreaming about events from the day, and the fact that your brother is dreaming about the video games he's playing right before bed, has more to do with the brain's short-term memory function than deep psychic dreams that have meaning.
Can you please explain?
One of the things that we do in REM sleep is the prefrontal cortex gets completely lit up and activated just like when we are awake.
Okay.
If you measure the sleeping brain, it looks just like the wide awake brain during REM sleep. And one of the things that's happening during that short couple of minutes process that happens 3 to 5 times a night is we are very literally re-experiencing all the data our senses retrieved during the day and making determinations. This is important. This needs to become a memory. This is not important. We can forget that. And so because the brain is doing this, everybody, every night, is having some experience of the brain re-experiencing the day's events in order to do that functionality of casting some shit off and making other things memory. In fact, sleep studies show us that college students studying for exams spend way longer in REM sleep than people who are not actively putting new information into their brains. That's one of the ways we know that this short-term memory function is activated during REM sleep, because people spend time in REM sleep more when they've got more to learn and remember. So your brother is just re-experiencing the video game in his sleep because he's experiencing it during his waking life. Now, if he could remember every little bit of his dream, there might be content in there that we could still interpret. But if someone just says, oh, I'm only dreaming about what happened during the day, they're accurate. That's true. It's a true story. But it has purpose. And without it, we wouldn't be able to remember shit. So it's a fascinating element of what the brain is doing during REM that's beyond just dreaming.
This week we have an email in dream from Veronica. So here's what Veronica says. I was on a family vacation with my entire family, dad, 2 sisters, brother, and my late mother. We were somewhere that felt beachy or like the Jersey Shore. We were walking around to shops and I wanted to just go back to the hotel, realizing I was sobering up and I was tired. No one wanted to go back, so I went alone. When I got to the hotel, it was huge, and I was confused where our room was. But we had been there the previous night, and I was just too intoxicated to remember. I asked the front desk, and she gave me directions. When I got to the elevator, I pressed up. Our room was on the 100th floor. A woman in the elevator looked at me and pressed the down button and said, "You're definitely going down, not up." As she pressed it...
Now I'm in love with this dream.
Yeah, it has some, reoccurring themes of the hotel, the elevator. The elevator dropped at a very high speed, like one of those amusement park rides, and my feet were off the ground, and I was bouncing. She got off, and I kept going further down. When I got out, it was like a simulation, because I knew I was underground, but there were bright blue skies and white clouds. Although for some reason, I felt like I was somewhere in Asia. So there's more to the dream, but she mentioned at the top that we could just interpret half of it. So I'll just stop there.
There's plenty right here, and in some ways, I kind of want to stop right at that image of the woman who's on the elevator, because that's the juice of the dream. All right, so let's start at the top. Family vacation means we're in a sort of segregated consideration of the family, right? It's a family vacation, so we know the dream's about the family, right? So it starts with family vacation, it's a dream about the family. But it's a vacation. It's not, oh, I'm with my family or I'm at home or we're engaged in family life. They're on a vacation, which is like a sequestered experience outside of normal life. Like that's what a vacation is. It's not regular life. It's extra on the side. So the dream then is about a consideration of the family in a kind of segregated way, separate from how life might be unfolding. Veronica is dreaming about her family, but in a kind of isolated, let me think about this sort of way. And it's beachy, which means she's at the place in consciousness where the unconscious and the conscious awareness meet. You talk about dream images that are typical, Zoe. The beach is a very powerful image that shows up in so many dreams because if land is consciousness and water is the unconscious, the beach is that dynamic place that lives inside of all of us where our unconscious and our conscious awareness are not only meeting, but dynamically interacting with each other. Juicy shit rides up out of the unconscious at the shore, and the water of the ocean can grab land and pull it back in, making some conscious awareness unconscious again. That's the dynamic vibrance of the beach in a dream as a setting for what do I know that's a little unconscious and a little conscious about my family dynamic is what Veronica's thinking about. There's so many times where she references being inebriated.
Yeah.
So we have to include that something about the dream is reflecting escapism and the impulse to avoid perhaps family dynamic wounds or something, right? Because it's, she's drunk with the family. We're going to interpret that the inebriation and the I was too drunk last night confusion as a symbolic representation of there are things about my family that I have chosen escapism over confrontation or awareness.
Yeah.
Hotels are always about transitions or changes. Like they are homes. We live in hotels. From a standard dream perspective, then a home is a reflection of the self. But with hotel, then it's temporary. We check in and we check out. And so I love hotels as a symbol also of processes, where we're going to temporarily pull out of our sense of self to have a change in sense of self. Make sense?
Yeah, so is her escapism and inebriation potentially temporary and she's moving towards something else?
Well, I think that woman in the elevator is an indication that there's not only a need to go deeper, it's happening.
Yeah.
The dream tells us it's happening. In fact, you could even say Veronica going to the front desk would be like Veronica going to her inner informational place, the part of her that has the answers. The front desk in the hotel is where you'd go to get your answer. So the front desk in the dream hotel would be the part of Veronica that can tell Veronica all about the process without being engaged in the process, kind of like a witness. Sure. So she goes to this witness and says, I need help finding my room. And it's the 100th floor. Now, what I love about this from numerology is that 100 boils down to the numerological value of 1.
Right.
Beginnings. New beginnings are often present when the number 1 shows up in a dream. And I would even say, rather than it being on the first floor or the 10th floor, which would also be a 1, the presence of 100th floor is like, to me, an amplification of the importance and the power of this particular beginning that the dream is reflecting. And so what is beginning, you might want to ask? And it's the woman who comes on to the elevator and says, oh no, honey, you're going down. You got to go below. You've got to go down below the surface, underneath the escapism and the inebriation and the family confusions, and go to a place below the surface where some deeper work can be done. And she sinks down to that layer very fast, and then the part of her that offered the guidance disappears. She's not there anymore, and she shows up into this landscape, which I love, even the landscape, because she's clear that she's in a foreign sort of place, underground, and maybe Asia, which suggests sort of mysterious, I've never been here place. But it has blue skies and clouds. That means there's expansiveness down below. She's not in a place that's cut off from the life force. And the blue color is the color of the throat chakra. So we have to then say that the blue skies down in this place where I think Veronica's about to do some shadow work includes communication that's direct, where inebriation would sort of reflect communication that is hampered or hindered or escaping. So I think the dream says it's time to do some shadow work. It's time to go below the surface. It's time to deal with some parental or family systems issues that perhaps Veronica has treated in the past in a function of escapism, but not now. She's going down. I love this dream.
Thank you for listening to Conscious Embodiment, Astrology and Dreams with Dr. Michael Lennox. You can find us on Apple Music, the iHeartRadio app, and anywhere you find your favorite shows. Head on over to michaellennox.com for information on astrology readings, the daily Astro Alert subscription, upcoming classes, and to join the mailing list.